Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. Hello to my loyal subs. I hope you're having a great day. And to anyone new here, a warm welcome. Thank you so much for checking out my channel. All I ask is that after watching and or listening to the video, if you find you enjoyed it, please smash the like button, consider subscribing, feel free to share, and hit that notification bell. And with all that out of the way, let's dig in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are listening from. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I have a busy day ahead of me. I have to take my father to some doctor's appointments, so I need to get this video out before I leave, so I may not have time to polish it up and edit out all my breaths. I do apologize. I wanted to share some information from statement analyst Peter Hyatt. This man is, in my opinion, brilliant, and I love listening to him. He did an episode on Sebastian Rogers, and what he talked about were risk factors for CA. I hope you know what that means, child A. If we are to believe all the stories that we've been hearing about Sebastian's home life, and it's easy to understand why he might have wanted to run away. But it's hard to imagine him walking out of his home in the pitch darkness of night, barefoot and without his cell phone. As a special needs child with autism, Sebastian likely taxed his parents, Katie Proudfoot and his stepfather, Chris Proudfoot, from time to time. According to Peter Hyatt, Sebastian, as a special needs child, even if he was high functioning, was at a greater risk for child A. Having a stepfather in the home was one of these risk factors for Sebastian, making it more likely that he would become a victim of child A. A second risk factor for Sebastian was the custody dispute that was taking place in the Proudfoots' lives. We know that stepfather Chris is currently fighting for custody of his 6-year-old daughter, Faith. Apparently, custody disputes are a risk factor for child A. Another risk factor for Sebastian was his incontinence. He was having trouble wetting the bed at home. He was having trouble apparently at school, having accidents. You know how Chris Proudfoot has talked about those accidents. He said that Sebastian enjoyed doing this, a very disrespectful way to talk about it, and also a very unintelligent way to talk about it. If Chris Proudfoot knew anything, he would see that the incontinence was likely the result of the SA incident that Sebastian suffered when he was 8 years old, under their care, by the way, and also anxiety overall. In such an issue also increased Sebastian's risk of falling victim to CA, according to Hyatt. It pointed out that with incontinence comes embarrassment, odor, more laundry to be washed. All of these things could have led to arguments in the Proudfoot home, feelings of failure, frustration, and this could be both on Sebastian's part and on Chris and Katie's parts. Another risk factor for Sebastian were the Child Protective Services reports, the CPS reports. Peter Hyatt said that all of these risk factors were piling up for Sebastian, really making him vulnerable to child A in the home. Any prior CPS involvement is a huge risk factor, unfortunately. Another risk factor is marital discord in the home where the child is living most of the time. We've heard stories of Chris allegedly telling his wife Katie that it was either him or Sebastian We also heard that Chris potentially told someone close to him that he was planning to leave wife number 5, Katie. And by the way, a father or stepfather and or husband who's had 4 previous wives is also a risk factor and a giant red flag. Poor Sebastian was living in an incredibly risky environment, the risk being the potential for him to experience abuse in the home. We must, however, remember that Chris Proudfoot was away from home when Sebastian went missing, as was the biological father, Seth Rogers. He was many miles away, and he was working, and apparently he's been seen on cameras at his workplace, which I believe is a correctional institute. I was going to say jail, but I think the politically correct term is correctional institute, or maybe those are 2 different places. In any event, he was in a correctional institute. It also talked about behavioral red flags, and he said that the first one in this case was the initial silence of Chris and Katie Proudfoot. It took them nearly a week to make a public statement about Sebastian being missing. They should have been sharing this information right from the beginning. Instead, they remained mum. Katie and Chris should have let the public know everything about Sebastian, what he looked like, what he was wearing, what he liked, where he liked to go, if he was a runner, if he liked going to places where there's water, all of that stuff right from the jump. And that they didn't do this is of great concern. The second red flag was the coordinated 911 call. Chris, who was not at home again, made that call to the sheriff's office. This, according to Peter Hyatt, and it makes sense, allowed Chris to control the information that was shared with law enforcement. And I was thinking about this. He was away from home. He did not experience whatever events went down in the home firsthand. Perhaps he felt safer talking to law enforcement with a made-up story. Had Katie been talking to law enforcement, she was there, she experienced the events. I think that Chris and Katie maybe felt that this put her at greater risk of slipping up. Maybe. I'm speculating. Nobody's been charged. The police keep saying there's no foul play. But if she's relating the events and she was there, could she have made a mistake and let a detail out that she didn't want to share? If Chris tells the cops what went down, he's more likely to stick to a story. And this also made me think about the one interview where Katie starts out when she was asked what happened on the night that Sebastian went missing. She jumps to the beginning of the day and shares that, fun fact, I made breakfast for Sebastian. Number one, we don't need to know what you served him for breakfast or that you made him breakfast. This could be her trying to prove that she's a good mother to the audience. She feels the need to prove that for some reason. And I think that for statement analysis, they would say that maybe something went wrong under her care, and so now she's trying to sell it to the public that she's a really good mother. The tone of fun fact doesn't really go with a mother who's telling the public for the first time that her child is missing and that she wants everyone to look for him. Here's what I want you to know about my son. This is what he was wearing. Can you please keep an eye out for him? We need urgency. We don't need fun facts. Hyatt also said that the police should have asked to speak with the person who was at home when all this happened. They should have said, we need to speak to Katie Proudfoot, without any input from Chris. For the coordinated 911 call to be like this, where they didn't ask for Katie, was, according to Hyatt, inappropriate. But for Chris Proudfoot, it seemed to be necessary. Another red flag is how Chris controlled their interviews, even though He's not a biological parent, and again, he wasn't home when Sebastian disappeared. According to Peter Hyatt, this is a red flag, a behavioral red flag. Chris Proudfoot should have done the least amount of talking during the interviews. Katie was home, she was a first-hand witness, so she should have the most to say. Peter Hyatt also flagged certain words that were said in the interviews. One of them was when Katie said that Sebastian told her, "I love you." Again, is a mother trying to prove that she's a good mother and that her child loved her. We saw the same language in Stefan Stearns when he was asked, "What did Maddie say or do when you dropped her off at school?" He thought about it and he said, "She told me she loved me. I told her I love her too." Something to that effect. I might not have it verbatim, but it's the same idea. He needed to tell us or to try to prove that there was a love relationship there. That should go without saying between a parent and a child. Hyatt also flagged the inclusion of a phone call as a red flag, a behavioral red flag, especially one that lasted 3 hours between Katie and Chris Proudfoot. This call being included by Katie, according to Hyatt, means that the call is very important and that it's related to what happened to Sebastian. Peter Hyatt said that Chris Proudfoot is connected to Sebastian's disappearance because of these language clues in his opinion and because of that long phone call. Again, this is speculation. We're not accusing Chris Proudfoot. He hasn't been charged, neither has Katie. Just want to make that clear. To say that Hyatt said that including the "I love you" part is persuasive language, where Katie was trying to persuade us that she's a good mother and that Sebastian loved her. Chris Proudfoot also stated that his and Katie's relationship with the biological father, Seth Rogers, was good. He played it up in the initial interviews. We quickly found out that that relationship is not so good. In fact, it's very toxic. By the way, Hyatt definitely believes that the thud Katie said she heard is another verbal red flag that the police should have followed up on. Hyatt believes that there was an altercation in the Proudfoot home and that Sebastian either left the house on his own accord or he was shut out. Hyatt leans toward the latter, that Sebastian was shut out or locked out of the house, and he said he leans toward that because of that 3-hour phone call Katie had with Chris. We know that Chris Proudfoot uses extreme methods of punishment for transgressions that he sees in children, and I say that because of the belt incident. He accused Sebastian of perhaps lying about something at school, and to punish Sebastian, he used a belt on his derriere. Seems to think that it might have been Chris Proudfoot's idea to possibly lock Sebastian out of the home for whatever happened, and that is maybe why Sebastian disappeared. He either walked out of the house and something happened to him outside somewhere, or he came in contact with foul play while he was out there. Now, in his interviews or later interviews, Chris Proudfoot quickly became combative. He put up a false sense, according to Peter Hyatt, of machismo. Hyatt believes Chris likely ridiculed Sebastian over his masculinity. This made me think of when Chris talked about the foods that Sebastian enjoys. He likes sushi, he likes tofu, and when Chris mentioned those things, it was almost like he was ridiculing Sebastian for having this palate, maybe even insinuating that Sebastian preferred boys to girls, if you know what I mean. That was my impression. This is not Peter Hyatt speaking right now, or his idea, that's my idea. Suggested that Katie may have also been given an ultimatum by Chris that night. about the punishment or about whatever happened to Sebastian, sort of like, you either lock him out of the house or I'm not coming home. Peter Hyatt also brought up Chris Proudfoot's responses to questions about the polygraphs. Hyatt said that Chris was cagey about answering those questions. Did you take a polygraph? Did you pass? All of this is very concerning. Hyatt feels, sadly, after 2.5 months, that Sebastian may either be found by hikers or hunters, or that he met with foul play while he was outside, and we may never know what happened to Sebastian. One thing Hyatt seems certain of, and that is that Katie has been deceptive. It's not a thing about being on Team Seth or being on Team Proudfoot. It's about finding Sebastian, getting answers. And I have to say that I really have great respect for Peter Hyatt. He is so insightful. I will leave a link to that particular episode in the description so you can watch it if you want to see the whole thing. It's about 1.5 hours, I think, or I'm not quite sure, a little over an hour. By the way, Hyatt also pointed out that there really was no need for Seth and Chris to take the polygraph because they weren't at the home when Sebastian vanished. That really is the bottom line. Only Katie's polygraph is truly of importance. Hyatt also feels that Chris and Katie's concerns and focus on themselves instead of on Sebastian is a red flag. The other thing he mentioned was that Katie moving away from the house while Sebastian is still missing is another behavioral red flag. That's not what parents of missing children typically do. We've all said that. But how will Sebastian get back home to mom if mom's not there? Hyatt said that in his opinion, if Sebastian left on his own accord barefoot without his cell phone, it indicates that he was under tremendous strain, under tremendous discomfort. You don't leave barefoot without your cell phone if you're casually leaving. I hope you found this information interesting and helpful to your understanding of the case, and I'll see you next time on Bed Crime Stories. Now do me a favor, smash that like button.